when you wake up in the morning, you are in a perfect position to what I call receive the download of all the work that your neural circuitry has been doing the night before. But if you immediately go to a sensory experience, especially a rich sensory experience of stuff scrolling by, you're actually missing the information that you processed at night. The problem is not pleasures. The problem is that pleasure experienced without prior requirement for pursuit is terrible for us. It's terrible for us as individuals, it's terrible for us as groups, and I have great confidence in the human species to work this out, but we are finding now, and we are going to increasingly find, that those who will be successful, young or old, are going to be those people who can create their own internal buffers. They're going to be able to control their relationship to pleasures, because the proximity to pleasures and their availability is the problem. If you look at the increase in use of drugs of abuse or prescription medication, which at least at the first pass deliver pleasure, pain relief, the whole issue with the opioid crisis, and dopaminergic drugs like Ritalin, Adderall, there sometimes is a clinical need, but tons of people are taking those recreationally now or to study. Huge dopamine increases are what those cause. That is a problem. That's a serious problem, because it creates a cycle where you need more of that specific thing. I would say addiction is a progressive narrowing of the things that bring you pleasure. And and I don't like to comment too much on enlightenment, because I don't really know what that is as a neurobiologist, but a good life, we could say, is a progressive expansion of the things that bring you pleasure. And even better, is a good life is a progressive expansion of the things that bring you pleasure and includes pleasure through motivation and hard work. And understanding this pain-pleasure balance, whereby if you experience pain and you can continue to be in that friction and exert effort, the rewards are that much greater when they arrive. And so I think that if you look at any drug of abuse or any situation where somebody isn't motivated or thinks, now they may have clinically diagnosed attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but a lot of what people think is ADHD, it turns out, is people just over-consuming dopamine from various sources. And also the context within a TikTok feed is, the context switch is insane. The brain has never seen, first of all, this is the first time in human evolution that we wrote with our thumbs, but that's a pretty benign shift. And then the other shift is, normally you walk from one room to another, or from a field into the trees, or from a hut or a house, or whatever it is. But now you can get 10,000 context switches in that 30 minutes of scrolling on Instagram or TikTok. And so it's all about self-regulation. We are going to select for the people that can self-regulate. So then people say, well, how do you self-regulate? How do kids self-regulate? Well, this is my hope, and one of the reasons I've gotten excited about public education and teaching neuroscience is that this is a place where knowledge of knowledge actually can allow oneself to intervene. When you think, I'm feeling low, I don't feel good, nothing really feels like good. Am I depressed? Maybe, but maybe you've saturated the dopamine circuits. You're now in the pain part of things. What do? Well, you have to stop. You need to replenish dopamine. You need to stop engaging with this behavior, and then your pleasure for it will come back. But you have to constantly control the hinge. It's not just about being back and forth on the seesaw. You have to make sure the hinge doesn't get stuck in pain or in pleasure. So it's a dynamic process being a human being. It's not easy. And remember, these circuits didn't evolve for this purpose. They evolved primarily for making more of ourselves. That's why they're so closely tied to the reproductive circuits. And that's why it was interesting and very relevant that you said that your desire to have sex with your wife is one of the most powerful feelings, and it kind of, from a neurochemical perspective, it wicks out into all these other pursuits, right? Those other pursuits aren't about sex per se, but it's the same molecule. So the feeling is the same. It's just that for some people, the amplitude of that dopamine signal for craving sex is very high. For some people, that's lower, and it's higher for video games. Whatever you lean into and you think about often in these pursuits will start to reshape these circuits, because these dopaminergic circuits are tied to everything. There are examples of people getting addicted to the most incredible things. There are also examples of people getting very good but not addicted to chess, for instance. It's all the same general set of mechanisms. We often think about the extremes of addiction, and those are really severe, but we also have to think about the more subtle forms of something we really love, but indulging in it just a little too often so that it no longer has that edge. There have been really good studies of people who jump out of airplanes with parachutes. Sure, it's a lot of fun, it looks like a thrill, but people do it over and over and over again, often die doing other things. They often become drug addicts. And there are a lot of examples of this. I mean, you can get addicted to anything. The key is to regulate that behavior. So you asked what should people do? Well, certainly I'm trying this now, and I have some good examples. Some young people I know and work with are taking breaks from not just social media, but no cell phone whatsoever. I'm actually trying an odd experiment, which is for the first hour of every day, no phone. So we have circuitry in the brain related to the so-called basal ganglia, and we have goes, sort of activating, think gas pedal, and then there's a lot of no-go circuitry. And learning how to keep that no-go, don't circuitry, as we could call it, tuned up is very important. And so many times throughout the day, but I try and get 25 a day, where I actively refrain from doing something that I impulsively want to do. Could be looking at my phone, but it could even be something trivial. Like I want to walk to the kitchen and get a glass of water. So I'm actively engaging in action-based denial. So restricting my behavior in some way as a way of keeping these dopamine circuits tuned up. Also not looking at my phone first thing in the morning for an hour, because knowing what we now know about the second phase of sleep and REM sleep being more predominant in the second wave of sleep, and the fact that you're working through a lot of emotional and logistical contingencies, you're reshaping your brain in sleep. That's when neuroplasticity occurs, during sleep. It's triggered in wakefulness, but it actually takes place in sleep, especially that second half of sleep. When you wake up in the morning, you are in a perfect position to, what I call, receive the download of all the work that your neural circuitry has been doing the night before. But if you immediately go to a sensory experience, especially a rich sensory experience of stuff scrolling by, you're actually missing the information that you processed at night. And even more importantly, that second half of the night during REM sleep is when the emotional weight of things becomes, let's say, you put it on the shelf properly. Things that are important to emotionally register get put in one shelf. Things that were, like the comment you got on Twitter that was triggering, doesn't seem like such a big deal after a good night's sleep. And that's because that second half of sleep is actually when you re-experience these things, but your body can't secrete adrenaline. It's kind of an internal form of therapy, or even trauma therapy. Yes. And that's why people who don't get that sleep are very, they're easily agitated. They feel like the world is crushing down on them. So when I wake up in the morning, I want to receive ideas that I want to learn from my learning. And if you take in new information, you are not in a position to do that. And 60 minutes is a tough one. So I give myself 2 no-goes for the 60-minute block if I can do it. There are mornings where I get enticed, or worse, I find myself reflexively picking up the phone without having made the conscious decision. And that's when I realize that, we are all deep in this process. And I think we have to regulate it. The experiment I'd like to do in the new year, I actually want to take every odd waking hour of the day off the phone. So even hours of the day, as long as it's waking, I'm willing to have it on and work with it. But odd hours, just turn it off no matter what. Just to see, can I do it on a rigidly externally imposed schedule? Because if you think about, most of the growth in life comes from these rigidly externally imposed schedules, and we hate them. But they are where we learn restraint. And waking up in the middle of the night from time to time to use the bathroom is actually quite normal. And some people are really obsessed by the fact, oh no, I woke up, and then they get triggered. But I learned this last year, that the peak in our alertness is actually about 90 minutes before our natural bedtime. And a lot of people, they reach the point in the evening where they're ready to go to sleep, and then they feel all this, excitement and surge of energy, and they think, oh no, I'm not going to be able to fall asleep. But that's actually a natural surge that's followed by a dip. A lot of people also have the trouble of waking up in the middle of the night and wondering why they can't fall back asleep. This is dreadfully hard for a lot of people. And one of the solutions is to go to bed earlier, because it means that your melatonin is starting to get released early in the evening. And so we all have the natural ability to push to stay up later if we really need to. This has obvious adaptive utility. But some people who should go to bed, quote unquote, should go to bed at 9 or 10 p.m., they're pushing to 11 or 12, and then their melatonin signal is starting to drop off. Now they can't fall asleep, or they're waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning and they're in trouble. How do you get motivated? Well, one way to do that is if you are good at subjectively attaching dopamine to the pursuit, just knowing, okay, I really am hungry for this. I'm going to tell myself that, making it 1% of the way is a success, and I'm going to keep going and I'm going to keep ratcheting on. And that's great if you can do that. But for people that can't do that, understanding this relationship with the pleasure-pain balance can be more powerful. Just understanding the more friction and pain that you experience, the greater the dopamine reward you will get later, and that serves as its own amplifier of the whole process of pursuing more dopamine.